Okay, that won't work either. Oh, this is quite a problem to be in, and I did it to myself. I guess this is what happens when you play with the past. By removing Nintendo from the equation, I think I may have put console gaming into a bit of a stagnant state. Am I wrong and Nintendo really did play as big of a role as the history books claim? Sega doesn't need another console. The TurboGrafx-16 CD pretty much went the same way the Sega CD did. No add-on's gonna save that thing no matter how this plays out. And them trying to create a 32-bit console just wouldn't happen. Plus Sega's still making all of this money with Alex Kidd. New generation consoles are always because of current generation competition, and we have the 8-bit competition. But with the TurboGrafx-16 trying to hype people up with their 16-bit is better than 8-bit gimmick not working, the next console that tries to do the same thing will just have a much more difficult time getting people excited for it. No one at this point is going to be dumb enough to say, look at us, we're 16-bit. Hell, even with the games on the PC they managed to... The PC. How in the hell did I miss that? In the real events it was done in the 6th generation, but Nintendo and Sony made it almost impossible to do it in the 4th gen. But there is no Nintendo or Sony, making it much safer to do it now. The only change now is that a completely different company would have done it. Oh, Sega, you're in trouble. The next console won't just beat you, it's gonna completely demolish you. (1989) Sega is still dominant. The TurboGrafx-16, like in the real events, is a failure. Who else at this point can bring us to the next generation? As of right now, people don't have a very positive perspective for the 4th gen. Sega's still becoming more popular by the day with their main character, and the games in the real events would have been created for the NES. However, while things in the console world are changed in favor of Sega, everything that's happened in the PC world is still the same. At least, until now. There's a lot of things that prevented the PC from truly exploding early in the gaming generations. While things like price may have played a big role in how many people owned a PC, there was something else that was holding it back from truly showing what it could do in the gaming world. The main thing that prevented the PC back then from truly being able to compete with consoles has to do with PCs having a problem that today is actually non-existent. PCs back then were weaker and rather slow. But sometimes when something doesn't work the way you may want it to, it could be because you yourself aren't using it properly. And when that becomes a reason, it actually can give you a light at the end of the tunnel. It just needs to be spotted by the right person. With the right knowledge, one could actually take advantage of the PC to not only allow the PC to do what the other consoles can do, but also do something completely different that the consoles either can't do or can do, but not as well. But what do you guys think would have happened if the PC was only competing against one console, and in this case, someone was starting to figure out tricks to the PC that others thought wasn't possible? This would actually create a scenario for us where one of two things would happen. Either this person would have to figure out how to do what's popular and then do it better, i.e. side-scrolling, or they would have to create something new and it has to become more popular than what already is. And this would end up being the one secret to beating Sega. If you can't beat side-scrolling games, then the hell with them. Create a genre that simply becomes more popular and even brings in a whole new fan base. The question now is, who does it? What if I tell you guys that there was someone that did that? Some of you may know of a man by the name of John Carmack. He's responsible for creating the engines used for certain popular first-person games. His earlier created engines allowed first-person perspective games to run on the PC in a much smoother fashion, while other people couldn't even figure out how to make side-scrolling work on a PC without it running slow to the point that it was unplayable. While everyone was so busy saying the PC simply couldn't do it, this guy figured out how to work his way around the same PC's weaknesses that others claimed just couldn't happen. While he also figured out how to make side-scrolling work on the PC, with a game like Mario, or in our scenario, Alex Kidd, taking over the side-scrolling genre, that knowledge goes to waste. So if the PC can't take over the 2D side-scrolling genre, then why not simply take over the third dimension, first-person shooter genre? But this still doesn't fix our problem. PCs just aren't as popular and are much too expensive to compete with consoles. We don't need a PC to compete against Sega, we need a console. We need a machine that works something like a PC but with a controller. We need a machine that's dedicated to gaming, thus bringing down the price while still doing what the PC can do strictly for gaming. We need a machine that, like the PC, allows people to play games online. Thus, in our new scenario, makes the internet popular for consoles and our altered event the same way it made the PCs popular. In other words, We need something similar to the Xbox that's technically not an Xbox, but still plays off the same concept. This new console has to make the internet popular before the PC does. Don't force it on people, but just make them realize that if they had it, they'd be able to play with other people, even if they're technically by themselves. Remember guys that at this point a lot of people didn't even know the internet existed, which would actually make it easier for whatever company that creates a console like this to be successful. While it would have a lot of selling points, its main point wouldn't even be graphics, it'd be online play. And that brings up a question. Who in the hell would actually make something like this? Putting Microsoft in this slot right now doesn't really seem very logical. We need a console that allows people to develop their games on it in the same way they'd be able to develop on the PC using Microsoft's operating system. But would Microsoft even allow that? A console that uses DOS or even Windows 95? My guess? Yes, but at a price. We are talking about Microsoft after all. Now we're looking at partnerships, but we need one more thing in this three-piece puzzle. We have the developers ready to make the genre that's about to change the way games work. We have the company ready to support them and take a big piece of the pie with them, but we need someone who's either willing to build the console or develop the technology for it but license it to someone else like, say, Microsoft. We need something who in the real events originally created something powerful to compete with Nintendo and especially Sega. But who can do it? Well, let's see what's happening in the real events and find out if we can spot someone. In 1991, EA's founder Trip Hawkins founded another company by the name of the 3DO Company. The main goal of this company was to try and make a next-gen CD-based console. This console, however, would be manufactured by a lot of different partners. Sounds like something we could use. We just need Microsoft to be their main partner. But before I can make them a success in the altered event, we first need to find out what made them a failure in the real events. The 3DO was an extremely expensive console, both for the developers of it and the people they were expecting to buy it. Over $100 million was put into the hardware, but strangely enough, the 3DO company never actually made any of the consoles. For the game developers, the low license fee of $3 for every game was seen as a much better deal than the expensive royalties that had to be paid to Nintendo and Sega. So this would explain why the 3DO was available for so many different manufacturers, as well as why the console was so expensive. Unlike Sega, Nintendo, and later on Sony, the manufacturers of this console could only make a profit on the console itself, and not both the games and the consoles. That could be a problem for us. So in order for the price of this console to be brought down in our events, we need Microsoft to take over as the main partner and be the only company that manufactures it. But in order for them to take over, something would have to be used on the 3DO that makes Microsoft feel like they could benefit from it. But in order for that to happen, a company would have to create something that, screw it, you guys get where I'm going. So the company that'll later be known as id has to create a game using Microsoft's operating system, and Microsoft, or more importantly Bill Gates, would then have to like the idea enough to feel that they could not only make a profit from their operating system on PCs, but also as something good enough to use on consoles. One thing to remember is that Bill Gates actually showcased himself in Doom. Clearly Microsoft knew just how popular this game was. Now imagine how popular it would have become as an exclusive to a console. Well, kind of an exclusive, the same way Halo is exclusive to the Xbox, but it's also on the PC. Doom would simply become Microsoft's Halo, and the 3DO would be their Xbox. But now Microsoft will be able to also have other games and not have to rely on one. Our new console war is an 8-bit console that took over the side-scrolling genre versus a 32-bit console that's taken over the first-person shooter genre, something that the 8-bit console can't even attempt to do. The new battle wouldn't be Sonic the Hedgehog versus Super Mario, it'd be Alex Kidd versus all of the games that developers were creating during the 32-bit generation. All the developers that wanted to take it to the next level in our altered events, but couldn't because of the Sega Master System's limitations. We could even get Alex Kidd versus Crash Bandicoot. But wait a minute, that was a Sony exclusive, wasn't it? If Nintendo at this point is bankrupt, then the events that happened between them and Sony which ended up giving us the PlayStation didn't happen. Therefore, how in the hell does a PS1 game, especially exclusive, still get made? Very simple answer. Sony didn't make games. Think of it like this. The difference between a game like Sonic the Hedgehog for Sega or Super Mario for Nintendo was the fact that the games themselves were made by the same companies that also created the console. However, the games that made the PlayStation as popular as it was weren't created by Sony. Because of this, if a console like the PlayStation were to either be a failure or in our scenario just simply not exist, then all of the games made for the PlayStation would have simply been made for whatever other console happened to be the most popular console at the time. And since in our altered events Nintendo failed and Sony is worrying about developing other things, this then leaves developers with a different an option. I'm sure most of you know the story of how Sony and more importantly the PlayStation came about. We know of Nintendo's betrayal to Sony, how the PlayStation was originally supposed to be an SNES add-on, but all of these events leading up to Sony versus Nintendo doesn't mean that the games that made the PlayStation 1 popular wouldn't have been made at all. If Nintendo still made the N64 but Sony never got involved, then the Sega Saturn would have ended up being the console of choice for developers due to Nintendo still sticking to cartridges. Final Fantasy VII, Gran Turismo, Crash Bandicoot, Metal Gear Solid, Tomb Raider, Tekken, Resident Evil, Twisted Metal, and all the other games that we all know made the PlayStation would have made the Sega Saturn, or in our case now, the 3DO. Going back to the real events for a second, do you guys notice that it almost seems like Microsoft felt it safer to create a console when the one company that they knew would give them the biggest problem no longer had the power? Clearly they never would have pulled the stunt that I just did with the 3DO while Sega and Nintendo had already had the power, and especially when Sony came along and put them both in their places. There was something about Nintendo that Microsoft seemed to stay out of their way, but when it became clear that Sony was the top dog, then they got involved. Even with the first party support that Sony had, they still got involved. Why was Microsoft so brave against Sony but not attempt it when Nintendo had the power? Even now in our current generation, Microsoft's trying to get the casual group and could care less about Sony. It's almost as though they never saw Sony as a threat at all, just Nintendo. And when Nintendo came along and got a whole new fan base, Microsoft once again seems to be more worried about Nintendo, and they aren't even paying any attention to Sony. They're even attacking Nintendo's new console. I wonder how Microsoft would have reacted if there was no Nintendo this gen. I guess that's where our altered events come into play, because now the power of the 5th gaming generation is in the hands of the 4th. I don't know about you guys, but it's starting to look like Nintendo not only played a strong reason as to why other consoles couldn't get a chance, but also may have played a huge role in why the PC was also held back. But what about our altered events? Could this be a good thing, or could it backfire on us and put us in the same situation as we're in today? Is it possible that certain developers are already thinking of taking advantage of people through DLC? Could Capcom make Street Fighter 2 on our new console while thinking about DLC for the Turbo and Super Street Fighter 2 editions? Would a company dare charge us for altered costumes in a game? Something that used to already be in the game and done with the simple action of hitting a different button? Better yet, how is Sega gonna fight back against something like this? While it may have worked in the real events, blast processing won't save them now. Bragging about 16-bit won't save them this time. The TurboGrafx-16 ruined that. Companies that made the Sony PlayStation successful are now gonna make the 3DO successful. Even Sonic the Hedgehog at this point won't be able to save them. Can they even do this by themselves? Or would they need a partner? Who would be their partner? I wonder what Apple's up to right now.